And
Well,
what are
that's something I say all the time, that what makes what we do hard, it's not physics hard, but being creative on command with money being spent,
yeah.
it's a different skill set and a different level of pressure.
Hello, I'm Shauna Carroll. I'm a post producer and editor. I've had the great privilege of working on some extraordinary projects, from scripted to doc to reality, short form and long form, which means I've seen my fair share of fix it in post. This podcast is my homage to the many incredible people who work in post, but often get forgotten behind the bright lights of the red carpet. Notes from Post is where I give Post a platform to give notes instead of receive them. Today, I'm going to be talking with the incredibly talented Booker T. Mattison. He is an author, filmmaker, and professor. He wrote and directed the BET Plus original film, The Sound of Christmas. The New York Times called the movie a charming new holiday film. When Booker isn't making films, he teaches directing and screenwriting at the University of Georgia, where he has tenure. And without further ado, let's dive right in. Hi, Booker. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's so good to see you and to be able to chat and catch up.
If we could start with just kind of talking about you, how you got started in the industry, where you're at right now in your career, and talk about like your first experience with post and what that looked like.
Sure. Well, my first experience with post started when I was an undergraduate mass communications major. Actually, you know what? Even before I was at Norfolk State, because I started my academic career at Tidewater Community College, Virginia Beach, and I was a radio television production major. So that was my first experience with pre-production, production, and post, even though it was an electronic news gathering context. But that was where I was exposed to, to editing. We were cutting on 3/4 inch tape back then for video, because we would cut the audio for the radio station, because I was also on air. You come to understand very quickly that these final products that you see, be it a newscast, be it a record, be it a movie or a television show, that it's built, it's constructed. You're not really aware of that, I don't think, until you are exposed to the post-production process. And even when you look at behind the scenes, which is a rare thing to even see nowadays, but that was the thing back in the VHS and DVD era. To your point, you rarely saw features on post. It was always when they were on set and then perfectly lit, controlled
Right.
interviews. So that was my first experience with post. And you come to understand very quickly that it's both magical and fun. And there's this chasm that will always exist between what you conceptualize, pre-visualize in your head, and then what you ultimately come out with once you're finished the production.
Yeah. And I think that is the magic that I love so much about post. It's that final stage of writing that everybody says, right? Like you write the script, you write while you're in production, then you write in post. And that's when all of the pieces and all of the prep work come together. And it is kind of this like magical moment where everything just feels right. And it's very
Sure.
much a feeling.
It's totally a feeling, but we're in the business of controlling, manipulating, and impacting people's emotions.
Yeah.
Let's
That's
be
it.
frank.
Yeah.
So, and, the adage goes, I forget who said this originally, but you direct a movie twice, once on set and the second time in the editing room. And that's 100% true. And it's a process that I don't know that I know of any directors who aren't very excited about post, because again, it's a second opportunity for you to take a swing at this story that you came up with however many months or even years ago in some
Yeah.
cases.
Yeah. Have you always had the opportunity to be in the edit bay and like have your voice through the edit
Well,
process?
yeah. And, because most of my work that I've directed has been independent. I've been in complete control of it. But even with The Sound of Christmas, it's a network film. I'm still involved because as the director, it's my responsibility to take this script and turn it into visual choices that are represented on the screen. The difference is from independent and then network is once I turned in my cut, after that, it's the network and the producers. So my role as in this case, writer director, is to make sure that what I turn in is as close to one, what I envisioned, and two, a finished product, because the more holes or loose ends that can be easily identified, that actually inspires more comments and even more commentary yes, I was involved up until I submitted my cut. And then, of course, once I submitted my cut, I would get an email here and there if it was a question about something. Both the production company, Megamind, and the network, BET Networks, were very respectful of my role as the director, specifically as it related to the post production process.
That's awesome. Have you ever had an experience where your role as the director in the post production process has not been what you envisioned it would be?
Sure. Well, it would be this film. I've done more writing for hire than directing for hire. Most of my directing has been independent. So I was in complete control. You submit it to film festivals and perhaps you'll get a distribution deal. But in this instance, there are adjustments that you have to make aesthetically and emotionally when you're in a network environment because I am a hired gun. They hired me to write it and direct it. They didn't hire me to produce it. They didn't hire me to have final say or final cut. They didn't hire me for any of those things. So you do have to adjust when you're trained and have been working as an auteur for 20 something years. And now you're in an environment where they can respect the heck out of you as a writer director. But ultimately, they're going to be comments that they give you where they don't care what you think. They don't care how smart you are or how talented you are. And maybe they think you're smart or talented. Doesn't matter if they think that or not. And I'm one who I can make a case for choices that I make. It's not combative or argumentative in any way. It's just, hey, you know, here's the reason why this is there. So they hear me and it's like, okay, great. Okay, fine. Change it. And you know what you have to do? You have to change it.
You got to change it.
You're not the highest person on the totem pole, and that's an adjustment.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the director's cut, your process through the director's cut, and then what happens after that. So, like new directors who don't understand yet quite what a director's cut is and how you have networks and producers who kind of take it over from a director and then
Precisely.
do what they are going to do with it.
Precisely. So in this particular instance, it was unusual because we had some staffing challenges. So we didn't even start post until over a month after we'd wrapped principal photography when the editor, the lead editor at least, was supposed to be working while we were shooting. So
Wow.
we were
Okay.
already under the gun. We already had an air date was already set. That wasn't changing. So we were already under the gun with that. And then once we secured an editor, he had 2 weeks to put together a rough cut, rough assembly. And then I only sat with him for 2 days. So I was not pleased
Really?
with that amount of time. And he was also working for those 2 weeks at home. We cut virtually. That's a huge adjustment because I cut movies on Zoom, not me cutting, but me being the director with an editor
Right.
before it was even sexy or trendy to do it. So it's not that I
Yeah.
don't know how to do this. The difference was for these 2 weeks, he's working without my input. But see, it was essentially us mashing together several things because I tell my students this. When your editor is going off to do that assembly, leave them alone. You're not involved in that, even up to a rough cut, depending on how the director and or network or studio wants to work. For me, I don't even really have to. I'll come in after an assembly, sure. But, until there's a rough cut, it's like, okay, because I like to see what the editor is going to do with this material. I wrote it, I directed it. Now let's put this expert, right? They're an
With
expert
their
in
fresh
his man.
perspective.
Yes, they can see things that I cannot. So then I'm there 2 days sitting with him. I wanted a third day. It wasn't in the budget, so I couldn't do it. So the cut that I submitted, I wasn't pleased with it. But I have to say that, and I don't know who got the cut into the shape that it wound up being, which I am pleased with it ultimately, be it the editor himself, the producer, the network, I don't know, because again, I wasn't involved once I sent off the cut. So I would have liked to have had more time in person to impact what was happening there. And once I knew that I was under the gun as far as time, then the big thing became, okay, major set pieces, really big scenes. I want to go in there and touch it. Because the way I like to do it is I touch every scene with the editor. So we're going through each scene and, okay, great. I love what you did there. Let's try this. Let's try that. That part didn't happen with every scene. It happened with a good number, but there were still several scenes that the way those came out because of the time, that's what it was. That makes me very uncomfortable. But I do thank God that because a lot of people have horror stories with networks.
Yeah.
The movie improved at every step of the process. So I don't have any horror stories, as far as working for the network beyond the fact that I did want to have more time and go through each scene. But that wasn't some person saying, oh, well, we're not going to do for you what you want. It was more, we had this funky scheduling thing and we were behind the chains essentially. And, we had to do what we did.
Yeah, this is super important because coming from the post side of things, and I also want to go back to the scheduling issue, but we'll go there in a second. I'm having to deal with directors and editors and network and help to foster these conversations. A lot of times, directors aren't really happy with their director's cut. And so I often get involved in those conversations to try and understand where the cut needs to go. And then we'll help foster it, either working hand in hand with the network or producers to try and get it to a better place. But like you said, a lot of times it's schedule issues or budget issues, which is a
Yeah.
big thing in post.
And in that network environment too, I'm sorry to jump in, but it made me think of something. You're scheduled out for the whole year and there's no flexibility there. It's television. So,
Right.
it's like this is what we have and that's it. So again, before we even started shooting, we shot in March, but we had our air dates, one for the streamer and one for the channel, a couple of months, 2, 3 months before we even shot. So that does create a different dynamic than if you're, working with a narrative feature that's going to be theatrically released, for example. I mean, yes, you have dates, but it's not nearly as regimented as that machine called
Yeah.
television.
The machine. Yeah. And for anyone listening, the two terminology that's used is linear and SVOD or streaming. And SVOD stands for streaming video on demand. Broadcasting on linear television with commercials and all of that, you have to cut to a clock. You have to make sure they have all the act breaks in and that it's going to be an exact length that generally you get from the network. And with SVOD or streaming, you don't have to necessarily cut to a clock. You have a little bit more flexibility. But often, if you're doing both, you tend to have it just tends to kind of be the same cut.
I just want to go back to the schedule part just for a second because I'm the one working with the network, analyzing where we are with the budget and the schedule, trying to make sure everything is working together smoothly. When you have an air date that is firm, a lot of people just hope that you can continue to, push and push so that the artists like directors, editors, composers, etc., have the time to really get their vision across. The problem is that air dates, like you said, often are set a year in advance. And it takes a lot of work to set those. Plus, there's just so many different departments that are involved in making those decisions. And a lot of like analytics and metrics and all of that goes into picking the perfect date to give the movie or the series or whatever it is the best chance of viewership and success. And in this case, it was a Christmas movie. So if it got pushed, it meant being pushed a whole entire year. And then the money is being spent in this fiscal year. And then the money people get involved because they need to account for what was spent this year, but not, like what the outcome is. So it just gets to a point where it only works to get it done now on this schedule at this time, which does mean that we end up losing the chance to be as artistic. There's just parameters that you kind of have to work around. And networks are really good at taking the quote from Voltaire, don't let perfect be the enemy of good, to like a whole other level. If it's good, get it out the door. Okay. So now back to cuts. My question for you is,
Did they do two different cuts? Like, was there any material that got left
No.
on the floor because they needed to cut to the clock? No. Okay.
No, and that's the cool thing though about doing original movies for streamers. And of course, all the streamers do original television shows and movies. That's how they get viewers. That's how they get new subscribers. So in this instance, because it was a BET Plus original movie, it's no different than like if you have a movie in the theater, when they air it on BET, they're just going to cut it and put commercials in there and they'd make those determinations, of course. And that's what they did with this one. I think it's 96 minutes. Now,
Okay.
contrast that with the current project that I'm working on. This is going to be a Tubi original movie, and the production company is Mar Vista Entertainment. Now, with Tubi, they actually have ads. So it is a streamer, but they have ads. So I am working on that 9-act structure and writing accordingly.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
yeah. So the outline, all 86 scenes. They outlined we don't want more than 86 scenes at this budget level. We don't want more than 10 locations at this budget level. We don't want more than this, number of principal characters. So it's it's far more controlled, the Tubi original movie than the BET Plus original movie because BET Plus doesn't have commercials and
Right.
Tubi does. So it's that rigid 9-act structure. And, you have to have a high emotional mark at the
Yep.
end of those 9 acts so that people will come back after the commercial break.
Okay, so let's stop and talk about this for a second. So for BET Plus, you were able to write seamless.
Yes,
So you didn't necessarily have to build in
not
your
at all.
writing. Okay.
It was an 82-page script, but it wound up being 96 minutes because it's a musical with 12 music cues.
So that's a
So
whole thing.
right.
Okay, obviously there needed to be 2 cuts, like, did the linear
Well,
version
you know what? You're right.
it needed to
Technically,
just
you're
be
right.
reformatted for
Right.
linear.
The linear version is a new cut only because they're coming in and cutting it at these natural breaks. But I will also say this too, that typically once it was on linear, the movies are usually like it aired from 9 to 11. Typically it's 9 to 11 o'clock, but they sold like an extra half hour commercials. I'm speculating because the movie was doing so well on the streamer. It was the number one movie on the streamer. So I'm assuming because it was doing so well, and this is total speculation for those who are listening, I don't have any inside information on this, but it went to 11:30, so that's what?
Wow.
Half hour more ads that they can sell, and that's great on the one hand as far as revenue, but, I heard from a couple of people most of the people I know watched it on the streamer, but those who did watch it, on when it came on BET, they were like, "Wow, that was just a lot of commercials," and it was 9 to 11:30.
Yeah, because they added a whole extra half hour of commercials
That's
in
right.
there. Wow.
Yep.
Oh, wow. Okay. So then let's go back to you having the network clock and needing to write to act breaks. So this is a post thing. So this is somewhere where post is dictating the writing process because you need to be able to know when you get into that edit bay, these are where my acts are going to end and this is my commercial break and I need to build into that.
Sure.
What are your thought processes when you're trying to build to the act break with also not making them cheesy?
Sure. I teach at the University of Georgia. I teach directing, screenwriting, and production capstone, which is the class where the students make their thesis film. I'm doing it a little differently this semester. Usually, I require students to write a feature-length script between 100 and 110 pages. What I'm doing this semester, however, is the culminating experience is going to be this very detailed outline. They're required to do the same exact specs that I have to submit to Mar Vista. With that said, there's a basic understanding of structure that you need to have, beginning, middle, and end. So even this 9-act movie still adheres to basic 3-act structure because it has a beginning, middle, and end. The
Right.
adjustment is that I know that when I'm coming to what's called an act out, I know that there has to be something dramatic, revelatory, exciting. Something has to happen that's going to make them come back. And here's the other thing. That's actually influenced how I write when I'm writing regular theatrical scripts, because what does that do? It just creates more turns, more reveals. The things that we like about watching movies, whether it's a theatrically released movie or a made for TV movie. So that's the adjustment, is knowing that there has to be an emotional high mark or something spectacular has to happen at the end of that act. Otherwise, which, you know what, even if I tried to get out of that, I couldn't, because right now, again, I'm at the outline stage. So I submitted my most recent outline on the 9th of this month. I'm waiting for the execs to give me comments, but they're going to comment. And I've had them say, okay, well, make this your act out and, move this over here, because that's the beauty of the outline. They can have a bird's eye view of what's going to happen and know exactly what they're paying for, right?
Right.
Before they start rolling in.
Okay, so let's define those terms real quick. So the outline is basically you just beating out what's going to be happening in the story. You're not
Yes.
actually going in and writing dialogue or anything yet.
Yeah, it's a very short paragraph describing each scene. And with this particular outline, because I signed on to this project back in last July. They put a pause on it in September and then restarted it I guess it was the end of November. So I thought the project was done. In this instance, because I've already done, this is my 4th outline that I've sent them. The paragraphs were much fatter and there was dialogue. It was far more involved than I would have considered sending the first one I sent in, because, you have to adhere to what they tell you first. But now that we have a relationship, and this is essentially a page 1 rewrite for the outline. And what that means, for those who don't know, with a page 1 rewrite, you're basically starting completely over with your story. The only thing that you're maintaining are the characters and the basic premise. So it's like starting over completely. That's what this outline was. So as a result, there was dialogue in there that wouldn't normally be that. The paragraphs were longer. Why? Only because this was essentially a page 1 rewrite.
Got
Normally,
it.
no, I would not know. Yeah,
Yeah.
it would just be a very short paragraphs for each scene. Also, you have the names and a brief description of the leads, supporting, and day players, and even that is limited, right? They tell you you can't have any more than this number. So it's a great exercise. It's the first time I've taught screenwriting that way, because even going all the way back to Regent, every feature script class I taught, the culminating experience was you writing a feature script. So
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
curious to see how this is going to go. The students won't have a feature script, but what they're going to have is a very detailed outline. And I suspect, although I don't know because the class just started, the students are going to be in a better position. Why? Because typically most of the students run out of gas at the end of the semester because it's
Yeah.
writing a feature script.
Yeah.
So
And that's
now
a
rather than
lot.
running out of gas and just trying to throw stuff in there to get to the 110 pages, they're going to have this very detailed outline. And not that writing the script is going to be easy, but you've already figured out the story before you ever start drafting.
That's awesome, Booker. I love that because that's teaching them a skill that they can then apply to a bunch of different story topics and they can spec out outline much easier than having to spec out entire scripts worth of content or information. That's really great. Okay. So your outline writing process, how long do you allot for that? How much time do you
Yeah,
usually need for that? And what questions do you ask before you get started? Like you have a network that's saying, hey, we want you to write the script. What kind of questions do you ask?
sure. Well, we have a creative meeting. And in this instance, this idea, the title is Twisted Marriage Therapist. And it's an idea that Marvista came up with. So they hired me to develop it and write it and then eventually direct it. So the amount of time is contracted. I believe it's 2 to 3 weeks for the outline. Then they have like 2 weeks to give me comments. And then once we go to draft, I believe it's 4 or 6 weeks for a draft.
Okay.
And then a polish. But again, it's all detailed. Here are the dates.
Do
So,
you
but
find
but
it
here's something
hard
else.
being creative in like these very tight, clamped
Well,
timelines?
that's something I say in class all the time, that what makes what we do hard, it's not physics hard, but being creative on command with money being spent,
Yeah.
it's a different skill set and a different level of pressure.
Yeah.
Even if you're at home and you're writing this great screenplay that you've been working on, it's your passion story. Oh, and you just love writing when you get off your 9 to 5 job. Praise God for that. It's very, very different when before you even do anything, everything is laid out. So with this creative meeting, so I have the log line, and so I go into the log line I go into the creative meeting with the 2 execs with questions that I have, and actually it's less questions, and I go into that meeting with ideas because they're hiring me for what? Ideas. So
Yep.
I'm going in with big structural elements already figured out, and I'm essentially pitching them on those ideas. "Oh, no, I don't like that. Oh, wow, I love that." Right? So I'm bouncing off of them, and the questions that I may have, they're likely to come up within that conversation as opposed to what questions I have before I go into it. Because once I have the log line, then my mind takes off because I know that the better formed ideas are that I present, the easier it's going to be for me to do what? Maintain creative control, not because I'm a control freak, which I am, but because again, if someone can't see something, that's going to inspire more questions. But if they can see it, even if they have adjustments to it, there's going to be far fewer comments than I don't get it, I don't understand it. And here's some fully formed big structural elements. Now you can begin to see what it is that I'm pitching, and the movie begins to crystallize in your head, in the head of the executive I'm talking about.
Okay. I love that. Okay. So you've had this meeting with the exec. You've gone through the whole process of writing the outline. It's approved. You've shot it. Now you're in post. Do you go back to any of those initial creative conversations and think through them as you're working through post, or by that point?
Not at all, because it's a very different process when you outline everything in the outline. Now, that's very different than, you're doing this independent feature film and you're kinda not even really sure where you're going with the script until you're done. Doesn't really work like that now. So my part of
Yeah.
what they're paying me for is, "Okay, tell us what you're gonna do, and
Yep.
then do what you said you were gonna tell us."
You better be
I
able to
can't.
deliver on what you
Right.
said.
If you've already told the network and the production company, "This is how this scene is gonna play out, and it's gonna be connected to that next scene, and that's how that's gonna play out." So on the one hand, that makes it easier, right? But for the auteur, it makes it more difficult because you have to know everything beforehand.
Be as
At least some
creative.
idea. I'll share this. It's a funny quote. I don't know if Dean Smith, he used to coach the University of North Carolina. I don't know if he actually said this, but a quote that's attributed to him is that the only person who can hold Michael Jordan under 20 points is Dean Smith. And I think about, like the network and the production
Yeah.
company. You can be as creative as you want, yeah, but it's not really it's about your creativity within the bounds of this particular project that they're paying for.
Yep. That's great. Okay. So outline, production, that's all great. Then you go into the drafting phase.
Mhm.
And at this point, everything's been approved outline wise. You're really just more or less now going in and building into those moments that have all been approved. And like you said, you had like 90 something scenes.
Yeah, I think in this outline, I think it was 82, and then they tell you specifically, don't go more than 86 scenes, and, Mar Vista, they do hundreds of projects a year for so
Right.
many networks. They know what they're doing. So
Yeah.
when they tell you that at this budget level, don't have more than 86 scenes, you know why they're telling you that? Because they've seen it happen a million times. So I
So
think mine
also
was
trust the
82 scenes.
process. Yeah.
Right, yeah, I think it was
Yeah.
82 or 83 scenes, so I was in good shape because I didn't even really wanna get up to 86.
So when you're now in the writing drafting phase of it, what things from post are kind of dictating that? Like, do you think about how it's going to cut together, or are you just fully in your creative narrative side of it?
Fully in the creative narrative side. I've been doing this for so long, and because I am a writer director, because there may be gaps, like if I'm just a writer and I don't direct, or if I'm just a director and I don't write, I think there may be some gaps, which is the beauty of, I think, a film school experience. And you and I both know you don't have to go to film school to be successful,
Yep.
but you can say that you have actually taken a project from I don't have any idea what it is ex nihilo, it doesn't exist, to a finished project. So that informs what how you think. So I want to tie this to your question about, am I thinking about how it will cut together and that kind of a thing? Even though I'm not actively thinking about how it's going to cut together or post, I write in such a way and even direct in such a way so that what I have will cut and will work. And even, and I know you'll appreciate this, even when I have to make decisions on set, like either combining scenes or cutting a scene out altogether because of time, and that always happens, as you know,
Yeah.
even that's inspired by my experience of, okay, well, if I cut this scene, okay, what's going to happen next? What's the transition going to be, et cetera? So it's almost like unconsciously, I'm perpetually thinking about post. And here's something else that I share with my students. The two most important things that you need as a director is pre-visualization is the first one, and then communication is the second one. And they're shocked because it's nothing technical, right? But the pre-visualization part, so going all the way back to that idea, it's impossible for me not to think about how it's going to go together just because of, how I've been trained in my experience. It's almost like you can't not see bad framing now when you're watching a
Oh,
television show.
it's
It's
so
it's not
true.
it's not possible.
Yeah.
You can't not see something that's soft. You just
Yeah.
can't.
Yep.
So that's why I wanted to qualify that because constantly thinking about that unconsciously, even if I'm just pecking away drafting the script.
Yes, that is so good. And I think that comes with practice, right?
Oh, yeah.
So to the point where it's second nature for you now, it's kind of part of your process. You said you've been doing this for 20 years. So you can kind of just do it unconsciously. So
Mhm.
yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today. I have enjoyed being able to talk to you and kind of catch up and hear about your process and what you've been up to. Just to wrap it up, I think like the main takeaways from our conversations are just do it. Cue the Shia LaBeouf gif. But really, don't let the vision that was quote unquote perfect in your mind, but isn't quite coming off the way that you wanted it. And it's not looking like perfect in the edit bay, stop you from getting your project out the door. I know so many people who will go as far as shoot most of their project, but because it's not exactly how they were dreaming or inspired in their heads of how they wanted it to be, they're not able to pivot and actually just push to get the project out the door in whatever semblance it is now. And that's the key for the ones who are successful and the ones who just can't seem to get the momentum. It's that they don't let anything stop them. No, it's not perfect. It's never gonna be exactly how you imagined it, and they're able to, like, grieve that original vision really quickly and then move on no matter what. They have
Mhm,
to get to the
that's
finish
great.
line, like, the finish line is what is on their mind. And I think picking a good post team who they can collaborate with and help push the project to the finish line goes a really long way as well, because it's not always going to be the fun stuff. And you need people who can come beside you and say, no, it is still good. You are still doing a good job. Let's just keep going and just get to the finish line. And that's the key.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Yeah. But
Wow.
yeah.
And that's a wrap on this episode of Notes from Post. Huge shout out to those who stuck around to the end. If you'd like to help me amplify the voices of Post, I'd be so grateful if you would leave a 5-star review or share an episode with a friend or two. It really helps to get the word out. Lastly, I'd love to hear any thoughts or suggestions for upcoming episodes. You can email me at notesfrompost@gmail.com or leave a comment on my site at notesfrompost.substack.com. Until next time, I'm Shauna Carroll.